The kitchen of the Red Pine Saloon smelled like grease, stale beer, and humiliation. Always had. Probably always would. Mara Klein stood at the wash basin, her hands raw and pink from scalding water, scrubbing at a cast-iron skillet that fought her every stroke. Steam rose in lazy curls, fogging the cracked window above the basin. Through the distortion, she could see the main street of Coldwater, a miserable strip of mud and wooden buildings that pretended to be a town. It was late February, the kind of cold that made your teeth ache. "Mara!" The voice cut through the kitchen like a rusty blade. Eugene Voss, the saloon owner, stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the main room. He was a thick man, soft around the middle but hard everywhere else. His shirt was perpetually stained, his breath perpetually sour. "Yeah?" Mara didn't turn around. "Table 4 needs clearing. Move." She set down the skillet, dried her hands on a rag that was more grease than cloth, and pushed through the swinging door into the saloon. The noise hit her first. Always did. Men's voices, rough and loud, competing with the off-key piano in the corner. The air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of bodies that hadn't seen a bath in weeks. Mara kept her eyes down, navigating between tables like she was invisible, which, mostly, she was. Table 4 was a disaster. Plates stacked haphazardly, glasses tipped over, a puddle of spilled whiskey spreading toward the edge. 3 men sat there still, mid-conversation, ignoring her as she began gathering dishes. Heard he took down a grizzly with just a knife. Bullshit! "I'm telling you, man lives up in the high country. Doesn't come down but twice a year." Mara stacked the plates carefully, balancing them against her hip. One of the men shifted his chair back without looking, nearly knocking into her. She stepped aside, quick and practiced. Invisible. She was halfway back to the kitchen when she heard it. "Hey, fat girl." Mara's shoulders tensed. She kept walking. "I'm talking to you." She pushed through the kitchen door, set the dishes in the basin, and exhaled slowly. Her hands were shaking, stupid. She hated that they shook. Eugene was at the stove, stirring something that looked like punishment in a pot. "You got 2 more hours," he said without looking at her. "Then you can go." 2 more hours. Mara glanced at the small window. It was already dark outside. Walking home after 10 meant walking through parts of Coldwater that decent people avoided. But decent people had options. Decent people had money. Mara had neither. She went back to the dishes. At 10:30, Eugene counted out her pay, 12 cents, for 14 hours. "Prices are up," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Had to dock you for the bread you ate." "I ate 1 piece. Bread costs money." He turned away, dismissing her. Mara took the coins and shoved them into her coat pocket. The coat was too thin for February, but it was the only one she had. She pulled it tight around herself and stepped out into the night. The cold hit like a fist. Coldwater didn't believe in streetlights. A few buildings had lanterns hanging outside, but most of the town was dark, lit only by whatever moonlight made it through the clouds. Mara knew the route home by heart, 5 blocks south, 2 blocks east, past the livery stable and the shuttered general store, then up the narrow staircase behind the boarding house to the closet-sized room she rented for $3 a month. She started walking, boots crunching against frozen mud. The first block was fine, the second block was fine. The third block, she heard footsteps behind her. Mara's pulse quickened. She didn't look back. Looking back showed fear, and fear invited trouble. She kept walking, counting her steps, listening. The footsteps matched her pace. "Hey." She didn't stop. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Different voice this time, which meant more than one. Mara's breath came faster. She was almost to the livery stable. If she could just get past it, there was a chance. A hand grabbed her arm, yanking her sideways into the alley between the stable and a boarded-up shop. She stumbled, catching herself against the rough wood wall. 3 men blocked the mouth of the alley. She recognized one, the man from table 4, the one who'd called her fat girl. "Didn't you hear us calling you?" he said. His breath reeked of whiskey. Mara's throat was dry. "I need to get home." "Home," he grinned. "You hear that, boys? She needs to get home." The other 2 laughed. One was tall and lanky with a face like a hatchet. The other was shorter, broad-shouldered, with eyes that didn't blink enough. "We just want to talk," Table 4 said. He stepped closer. Mara pressed her back against the wall. The alley was a dead end. No way out except through them. I don't have any money, she said. Who said anything about money? Hatchet-Face snickered. Mara's hands clenched into fists. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system. Fight or flight, except there was nowhere to fly, and fighting 3 men was suicide. Table 4 reached out, his hand going for her coat. Leave me alone. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. He paused, eyebrows raising. Or what? Or I'll scream. Scream all you want, darling. Nobody's going to come. He wasn't wrong. Mara knew it. They knew it. In Coldwater, you learned fast that help didn't come for people like her. His hand closed on her coat, pulling her forward, and then a voice cut through the darkness. She told you to leave her alone. All 3 men spun around. A figure stood at the mouth of the alley. Tall, broad across the shoulders. He wore a heavy coat, dark and weather-beaten, and his hat was pulled low enough that his face was mostly shadow. Table 4 didn't let go of Mara's coat. This ain't your business. I'm making it my business. You're making a mistake. The stranger took a step forward, not hurried, not aggressive, just certain, like he was walking into his own house. 3 of you, he said quietly. 1 of her, and you still had to corner her in an alley. That about right? Hatchet-Face bristled. Who the hell are you? Someone who's giving you a chance to walk away. Table 4 laughed. It sounded forced. You're unarmed, friend. The stranger stopped a few feet from them. Up close, Mara could see more of his face. Lined, weathered, maybe 40, dark beard, eyes that didn't look away. You sure about that? He said. Something in his voice made Table 4's grip on Mara's coat loosen. Just a fraction, but enough. The stranger's gaze shifted to each man in turn, slow and deliberate. You can walk away right now. Go back to the saloon. Forget this happened. Or you can find out what happens when you don't. Silence. Wind whistled through the alley, carrying the smell of snow. Broad Shoulders, the quiet one, was the first to break. He took a half step back. This is bullshit, Table 4 muttered, but he let go of Mara's coat. Hatchet-Face pointed at the stranger. You just made an enemy, friend. I'll survive. The 3 men backed out of the alley, keeping their eyes on the stranger until they turned the corner and disappeared into the dark. Mara stood frozen against the wall, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. The stranger looked at her. His expression was hard to read. You all right? Mara couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up completely. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. You should get home. Don't take the main streets. He turned to leave. Wait. The word came out before she could stop it. He paused. Mara swallowed hard. Who are you? Nobody important. He glanced back toward the street, then at her again. Get home safe. And then he was gone, footsteps fading into the night. Mara stood in the alley for a full minute before her legs remembered how to work. When she finally moved, she took the long way home, sticking to the narrowest streets, the darkest corners. She didn't see the stranger again that night, but she couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. You should get home safe. Like it was that simple. Like she had any control over it at all. The next morning, Mara woke to pounding on her door. Rent's due! The landlady's voice was shrill enough to strip paint. Mara sat up too fast, her head spinning. The room was freezing. She'd run out of coal 3 days ago and couldn't afford more. Her breath fogged in the air. I know, she called back. I'll have it by Friday. You better. I got people waiting for this room. Footsteps retreated down the hall. Mara dropped her face into her hands. Friday was 4 days away. She had 12 cents to her name. Rent was $3. The math didn't work. It never did. She dressed quickly, layering on both her shirts and the coat that smelled like the saloon. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since the single piece of bread Eugene had docked her pay for. No time to think about that now. She left the boarding house and headed toward the Red Pine, cutting through back alleys to avoid the main street. The sun was barely up, the sky a pale, washed-out gray. When she reached the saloon's back door, Eugene was already there, unloading crates from a wagon. You're late, he said. I'm 5 minutes early. Attitude'll cost you. He hefted a crate and shoved it toward her. Get these inside. Mara grabbed the crate. It was heavier than it looked, packed with bottles that clinked ominously as she carried it through the door. The kitchen was dim and cold. She set the crate down and went back for another. 3 trips later, Eugene followed her inside. Need to talk to you, he said. Mara's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever started with those words. Eugene leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Had some men in here last night, after you left. She said nothing. They were asking about you. What did they want? Didn't say, but they weren't happy. He scratched his jaw. Look, Mara, you're a good worker, mostly, but I can't have trouble in my place. I didn't do anything. Doesn't matter. Trouble's trouble. He straightened up. I'm letting you go. The words hit like cold water. What? You heard me. Finish out today, then you're done. Eugene, please. I need this job. Should have thought about that before you pissed off half the town. I didn't. Mara's voice cracked. She hated the sound of it. Desperate. Weak. I didn't do anything. They came after me. I was just trying to get home. Eugene shrugged. Not my problem anymore? He walked out, leaving her standing in the cold kitchen, surrounded by crates of whiskey she'd never be able to afford. Mara worked the rest of the day in a fog. Dishes, floors, tables. The same motions she'd done 1,000 times, but now every movement felt like sleepwalking. Her mind kept circling the same question. What now? Without this job, she couldn't pay rent. Without rent, she had no room. Without a room, she'd be on the street. And cold water winters killed people on the street. By the time her shift ended, the sun was setting again, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple. Mara stood in the alley behind the saloon, staring at the coins Eugene had shoved into her hand. 18 cents. Her final pay. She wanted to scream, or cry, or break something. Instead, she started walking. Not toward the boarding house. There was no point. She couldn't pay rent, couldn't explain to the landlady that she'd just lost her job, couldn't face the look of contempt she'd get when she asked for more time. She walked south, past the edge of town, where the buildings thinned out and gave way to scrub brush and rocky ground. The road turned into a trail, winding up toward the foothills. Mara didn't have a plan. She just walked. The cold bit at her face, her hands, her feet. She welcomed it. Cold was simple. Cold didn't lie to you. She walked until the sun was completely gone and the stars came out, hard and bright and indifferent. And then she heard it, a voice, singing. Mara stopped. The voice was coming from somewhere off the trail, deeper into the rocks. Male. Low and rough, but carrying a melody she half recognized, some old song about rivers and leaving home. She should turn around, go back to town, find somewhere to sleep, even if it was a doorway or a stable. But her feet kept moving, following the sound. The trail narrowed, winding between boulders. The singing got louder, and then she saw the light. A small fire, tucked into a sheltered spot between 2 massive rocks. A man sat beside the fire, his back to her. Mara's breath caught. She recognized the coat, the hat, the stranger from the alley. She should leave. She should absolutely leave. But something rooted her in place, some stupid, desperate part of her brain that remembered what he'd said. You should get home safe. He stopped singing. You planning to stand there all night? Or are you going to come sit by the fire? Mara's heart jumped into her throat. He didn't turn around, just kept staring at the flames. How did you... Heard you about 5 minutes ago. You walk loud. Heat flooded her face. She almost turned and ran, but the fire looked warm, and she was so cold. Slowly, she stepped closer. The stranger glanced at her, then nodded toward a flat rock across from him. Sit. Mara sat. Up close, she could see him better. Older than she'd thought, lines around his eyes, gray threading through his dark beard. His hands were scarred, rough from work. He had a tin cup in one hand, steam rising from it. You lost? He asked. No. Then what are you doing out here? Mara looked at the fire. I don't know. He studied her for a long moment, then reached into a pack beside him and pulled out another tin cup. He filled it from a battered pot sitting at the edge of the fire and held it out to her. Coffee. It's terrible, but it's hot. She took it. The metal burned her hands, but she didn't let go. The first sip was bitter enough to make her wince, but warmth spread through her chest. Thank you, she said quietly. He nodded. They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled, wind moved through the rocks overhead. Finally, Mara spoke. Those men last night, They came back. The stranger's jaw tightened. They hurt you? No, but they got me fired. From the saloon. How did you? Small town. People talk. He took a sip of his coffee. What are you going to do? I don't know. Another silence, longer this time. You got family? He asked. No. Friends? Mara almost laughed. In cold water? He seemed to consider that. Then he set down his cup and looked at her directly. What's your name? Mara. Mara Klein. Rowan Hale. He said it simply, like it didn't matter. But Mara remembered what the men at the saloon had said the night before. Man lives up in the high country. Doesn't come down but twice a year. You live up in the mountains, she said. I do. Alone? Mostly. Why? Rowan's expression shifted, something hard and distant crossing his face. Because people are easier to deal with when you don't have to deal with them every day. Mara understood that, more than he probably realized. She finished her coffee and set the cup down. I should go. Where? Good question. Rowan stood, brushing off his pants. You can sleep here tonight. By the fire. It's safer than town. I can't. Wasn't asking. He walked to the other side of the fire and pulled a bedroll from his pack, tossing it to her. Use that. I'll keep the fire going. Mara caught the bedroll, her throat tight. Why are you helping me? Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Because nobody helped me when I needed it, he said finally, and I remember what that felt like. He turned away, settling onto the ground with his back against a boulder, his rifle resting across his lap. Mara spread the bedroll near the fire and lay down, pulling it up to her chin. The ground was hard and cold, but the fire was warm, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to safe. She closed her eyes, and for once, sleep came easy. Morning came with the smell of bacon. Mara's eyes snapped open. For a disorienting moment, she didn't know where she was. Then she saw the rocks, the fire. Rowan crouched beside it with a small pan. He glanced at her. You snore. I do not. Like a damn sawmill. But there was something almost like amusement in his voice. Mara sat up, her back aching from the hard ground. Rowan flipped something in the pan, actual bacon, crispy and golden, and slid it onto a tin plate. He handed it to her along with a chunk of bread. Eat. She stared at the food. When was the last time she'd had bacon? Months. Maybe longer. I can't pay you, she said. Didn't ask you to. Mara ate slowly, savoring every bite. It was the best thing she'd tasted in forever. Rowan made himself a plate and sat across from her, eating in silence. When they finished, he stood and started packing up his camp with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. What are you doing? Mara asked, heading back up the mountain. Now? Now! Panic flickered in her chest. What about me? Rowan paused, his back to her. What about you? Mara faltered. I don't know what to do. He turned around, studying her with those unreadable eyes. You got two choices, he said. Go back to town, find another job, try to survive, or what? Rowan hesitated. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. Or you come with me. Mara's breath stopped. Up the mountain, she said. Yeah. For how long? However long you want. Why would you? Because you'll die in that town, Rowan said flatly. Maybe not today, maybe not next week, but soon. And I'm tired of watching people die when they don't have to. Mara's hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, from something else, something that felt dangerously close to hope. I don't know anything about living in the mountains, she said. You'll learn. What if I'm useless? What if I slow you down? Then you slow me down. He shrugged. I've lived alone for 10 years. I can handle it. 10 years. Mara looked back toward town. She couldn't see it from here, but she could picture it. The saloon, the boarding house, the men who'd cornered her in the alley. Nothing there but more of the same. More cold, more hunger, more invisibility. She looked at Rowan. Okay, she said. His eyebrows rose. Okay? I'll come. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. Get your things. I don't have things. Rowan's expression softened, barely, but enough. Then I guess you're ready. He finished packing, shouldered his gear, and started up the trail. Mara followed. She didn't look back. The climb was brutal. Within an hour, Mara's legs were screaming. Within 2, she could barely breathe. The trail was steep and rocky, winding up through pine trees that grew thicker as they climbed. Rowan didn't slow down, didn't look back to check on her. He just kept walking, steady and relentless. Mara gritted her teeth and kept going. By midday, they stopped at a small creek. Rowan filled his canteen and handed it to her without a word. She drank deeply, the water so cold it made her teeth ache. How much further? She gasped. Another 4 hours? Mara almost cried. But she didn't. She handed back the canteen, wiped her mouth, and stood up. Let's go. Rowan looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. You're tougher than you think, he said. Then he started walking again. Mara followed. They reached Rowan's cabin just as the sun was setting. It was small, rough, built from logs and tucked into a clearing surrounded by towering pines. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A shed stood off to one side, and beyond that, Mara could see a small corral with 2 horses. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever had. Rowan pushed open the door and stepped inside. Mara hesitated, then followed. The interior was simple. One large room with a fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner. Shelves lined one wall, stocked with supplies. Everything was clean, organized. You'll sleep there, Rowan said, nodding toward a pile of furs near the fireplace. I'll take the bed. We'll figure out something more permanent later. Mara nodded, too exhausted to argue. Rowan built up the fire and started making dinner, venison stew, thick and rich. They ate in silence, and when they finished, Mara helped him clean up. Then she collapsed onto the furs and was asleep before her head hit the makeshift pillow. The first week was hell. Rowan woke her before dawn every day, taught her how to split wood, how to haul water from the creek, how to tend the horses, mend fences, skin a rabbit. Her hands blistered, her back ached, every muscle in her body screamed in protest. But she didn't quit. At night, she fell asleep so fast she didn't even dream. The second week was worse. Rowan took her hunting, taught her how to move quietly through the forest, how to read tracks, how to wait. She was terrible at it, loud, clumsy. She spooked every animal within a mile. But she didn't quit. The third week, something shifted. Her hands stopped blistering. Her breathing came easier. She split an entire cord of wood without stopping. And when Rowan took her hunting again, she stayed quiet long enough for him to take down a deer. That night, he looked at her across the fire. You're learning, he said. It was the closest thing to praise she'd ever gotten from him. Mara smiled. Bum. A month passed, then 2. Winter gave way to early spring. The snow melted. Wildflowers started pushing up through the soil. Mara learned to bake bread in the cast-iron Dutch oven, learned to mend her own clothes, learned the names of the plants Rowan harvested for medicine. She wasn't the same girl who'd worked in the saloon. That girl had been hunched and silent and scared. This girl stood straighter, spoke when she had something to say, met people's eyes. This girl was waking up. Months. And then one morning in late April, everything changed. Mara was out by the creek filling the water pails when she heard the horses. She looked up. 3 riders were coming up the trail toward the cabin. Her blood went cold. She recognized one of them, table 4. Mara dropped the pails and ran. Mara's boots slipped on the wet rocks as she ran, water from the dropped pails soaking into her pant legs. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. The cabin was 50 yards away. 50 yards that felt like miles. She burst through the door, gasping. Rowan was at the table, cleaning his rifle. He looked up, saw her face, and was on his feet in an instant. What? Men, 3 of them, coming up the trail. His jaw tightened. He moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. You know them? 1, from town, from the night. Her voice caught. Rowan's expression went flat and cold. He checked the rifle's chamber, then grabbed his coat from the peg by the door. "Stay inside," he said. "Rowan, stay. Inside." He walked out, closing the door behind him. Mara stood frozen for 3 seconds, then moved to the window. Through the narrow gap, she could see Rowan standing in the clearing, rifle held loose in one hand, waiting. The riders came into view. Table 4 in front, flanked by Hatchet-Face and a man Mara didn't recognize, stocky, with a thick beard and mean eyes. They stopped about 20 feet from Rowan. "Well, well," Table 4 said. He was grinning, but it didn't reach his eyes. "The mountain man himself." Rowan said nothing. "We're looking for someone," Table 4 continued. "Girl about this high, heavy set, goes by Mara. You seen her?" "No." "Funny, because we got word she was seen heading up this way with you." "Your word's wrong." Hatchet-Face leaned forward in his saddle. "We just want to talk to her, make sure she's all right. She ran off without paying what she owed." "That's a lie," Mara whispered to herself. Rowan's grip on the rifle shifted, just slightly, but all 3 men noticed. "You calling us liars?" Mean Eyes said. "I'm saying she's not here, so you can turn around and go back where you came from." Table 4's grin widened. "See, here's the thing. We rode a long way, tracked her for weeks, and I don't think you're being entirely honest with us." "Don't care what you think. We got rights," Hatchet-Face said. "She stole from the saloon, stole from the boarding house. She owes money all over Coldwater." Every word was a lie. Mara's hands clenched into fists. Rowan's voice stayed level. "Even if that was true, and it's not, she's not your problem anymore. She's mine." Table 4's grin faded. "Yours?" "That's right. She your woman now?" Rowan didn't answer, didn't need to. Mean Eyes spat into the dirt. "You can't just take someone's property." "She's not property. The law says different." "There's no law up here, just me." The 3 men exchanged glances. Something unspoken passed between them. "Look," Table 4 said, his tone shifting to something that tried to sound reasonable. "We don't want trouble, just send her out. We'll take her back to town, let her settle her debts, and that's the end of it." "No. You're making a mistake." "Wouldn't be my first." Table 4's jaw worked. "You know what? Maybe we'll just wait. Sooner or later she's got to come out. Or maybe we'll come back with more men. Make it official." "You could try." The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. Mean Eyes reached for something at his belt, a knife maybe, or a pistol. Rowan's rifle came up in one smooth motion, the barrel pointed directly at Mean Eyes' chest. "I wouldn't," Rowan said quietly. The clearing went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Mean Eyes' hand stopped moving. Table 4 held up both hands in a placating gesture. "Easy now. Nobody needs to get shot today." "Then leave." "We're just trying to leave. Now." The cold certainty in Rowan's voice left no room for argument. Table 4 stared at him for a long moment, then yanked his horse's reins around. "This isn't over." "Yeah, it is." The 3 men rode back down the trail, slow and deliberate, making sure everyone knew they weren't scared. But they were leaving. Rowan stood there, rifle still raised until they disappeared into the trees. Then he lowered the weapon and let out a long breath. Mara opened the door and stepped out. Her legs felt shaky. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe." "You shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have—" "What?" Rowan turned to look at her. "Let them take you. You could have gotten killed. So could you." Mara's throat tightened. "This is my fault. I brought this here. I should— Stop." "But, Mara." Rowan walked over to her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "You didn't bring anything here except yourself. And those men? They're the ones who made the choice to come up here. They're the ones who decided to lie and threaten. That's on them, not you. But now you're in danger because of me. I've been in danger before. I'll be in danger again." He set the rifle against the cabin wall. "That's just how life works." Mara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him he didn't understand, that she wasn't worth the trouble, that he should just send her back and be done with it. But the words wouldn't come, because some small, stubborn part of her, the part that had survived 14-hour days and frozen nights and men who saw her as nothing, didn't want to go back. That part wanted to stay. What do we do now? She asked finally. Rowan looked toward the trail, his expression thoughtful. We get ready. For what? For whatever comes next. The next 3 days passed in tense preparation. Rowan checked and rechecked his weapons, stocked up on ammunition, reinforced the cabin's door with an extra crossbar. He showed Mara how to load and fire his old revolver, a heavy piece that kicked like a mule. I can't shoot this, Mara said after her first attempt left her hand numb. You can if you have to. What if I can't? What if I freeze? Rowan looked at her. Then you unfreeze. Fear's just your body getting ready to act. You use it. Don't let it use you. Easy for him to say. But Mara practiced anyway. Every morning, she'd go out to the clearing behind the cabin and fire at targets Rowan set up. Old bottles, chunks of wood. Her aim was terrible at first, but slowly, painfully, it improved. On the 4th day, Rowan saddled both horses. Where are we going? Mara asked. Town. Not Coldwater. Different one. About 2 hours east. Why? Supplies and information. Mara's stomach clenched. Is that safe? Safer than waiting here blind. They rode out at first light, following narrow trails that wound through dense forest. Rowan moved with absolute confidence, never hesitating at forks or crossroads. Mara followed, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement in the trees. The town, if you could call it that, was called Pine Haven. It consisted of maybe 15 buildings clustered around a muddy crossroads. A general store, a blacksmith, a post office that doubled as a tavern. Rowan tied the horses outside the general store and went in. Mara stayed close, acutely aware of the stares they were getting. A few people nodded at Rowan. Nobody looked at her. Inside the store smelled like sawdust and tobacco. The proprietor, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his ledger. Rowan, been a while. 3 months. You need the usual? And then some. The proprietor, his name was Morris, Mara learned, started pulling items from the shelves. Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. Rowan added a few things Mara didn't expect. Fabric, thread, a pair of sturdy boots that looked about her size. For her? Morris asked, nodding at Mara. Yeah. Morris studied her for a moment, then went back to his ledger. Heard there's been some trouble over Coldwater Way. Rowan's expression didn't change. That's so. Some men claiming a girl ran off. Stole from half the town, according to them. They're offering a reward for information. Mara's blood went cold. Rowan set a can of beans on the counter with deliberate care. How much? $50. A fortune. More money than most people in these parts saw in a year. Morris glanced at Mara again, then back at Rowan. Just thought you should know. Appreciate it. They finished the transaction in silence. Morris packed everything into burlap sacks, and Rowan loaded them onto the horses. As they were preparing to leave, a man approached from across the street. He was older, maybe 60, with a marshal's badge pinned to his vest. Rowan Hale, the marshal said. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years and weather. Marshal Webb. Heard you were in town. Thought I'd have a word. Rowan's posture shifted, not aggressive, but ready. About what? Webb looked at Mara. This the girl they're looking for? Mara's heart stopped. Don't know what you're talking about, Rowan said. Come on, Rowan. I've known you 10 years. You're a lot of things, but a liar isn't one of them. Rowan said nothing. Webb sighed. Look, I got a telegram yesterday. Eugene Voss and some others from Coldwater are claiming this girl, Mara Klein, stole money and goods. They want her brought back to face charges. She didn't steal anything, Mara said. Her voice came out stronger than she expected. Webb looked at her properly for the first time. You her? Yes. Did you take anything that wasn't yours? No, I worked at the saloon. Eugene paid me 12 cents for a 14-hour shift and docked me for eating bread. I didn't steal, I just left. And the boarding house. I couldn't pay rent because I lost my job. That's not stealing. Webb scratched his jaw. Technically, if you had property in the room and didn't settle your debts before leaving, that could be considered. She had nothing, Rowan interrupted. No property, nothing to steal. They're lying because she embarrassed them. How? By surviving. Webb studied them both for a long moment. Then he pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to Rowan. This came with the telegram. Rowan unfolded it. Mara leaned in to read over his shoulder. It was a wanted notice. Her name. A rough description. The list of supposed crimes. And at the bottom, in neat handwriting, reward for information leading to her return, $50. Mara felt sick. I can't arrest her without proof, Webb said. And right now, all I've got is accusations from men I don't know against a girl I just met. But Rowan, you need to understand. If they push this, if they come here with a warrant or a writ or enough men to make it official, I won't have a choice. Understood. Where are you headed? Back to my place. And if they come looking, Rowan folded the notice and handed it back. Then they'll find me. Webb's expression was hard to read. Don't do anything stupid. Never have. That's a damn lie, and you know it. But there was something almost like affection in the marshal's voice. They left Pine Haven without another word. The ride back was silent. Mara kept replaying the conversation in her head, the weight of that wanted notice pressing down on her like a physical thing. $50. People would kill for less. When they finally reached the cabin, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Rowan unloaded the supplies while Mara tended the horses. Inside, he built up the fire and started making dinner. Beans and salt pork, simple but filling. They ate without talking. Finally, Mara couldn't take it anymore. I should go back. Rowan looked up from his plate. What? To Coldwater. I should go back and face them. Clear this up before it gets worse. It won't clear anything up. They'll arrest you, probably put you in jail. And then what? Then at least you're safe. I'm not the one who needs protecting. Yes, you are. Mara's voice cracked. You think I don't see what you're doing? You're risking everything, your home, your safety, your life, for someone you barely know. Why? What do you get out of this? Rowan set down his fork. You really want to know? Yes. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. I had a daughter once. Mara's breath caught. Her name was Sarah. She was 7 when the fever took her. My wife died 2 days later. He paused, his jaw working. I wasn't there. I was off working, trying to make enough money to keep us fed. By the time I got home, they were already in the ground. Rowan? After that, I couldn't stay in town. Couldn't stand being around people, listening to them offer sympathy that didn't mean anything. So I came up here, built this cabin, figured I'd live out my days alone and that'd be that. He looked at her. And then I saw you in that alley, and I saw my daughter. Not literally, but I saw what could have happened to her if she'd lived. If the world had chewed her up and spat her out the way it does to girls like you. Girls who don't have anyone looking out for them. Tears were running down Mara's face. She didn't try to stop them. So that's what I get out of this, Rowan said. I get to do something I couldn't do before. I get to help someone who needs it. And maybe, just maybe, that makes up for a fraction of what I failed to do. You didn't fail, Mara whispered. Didn't I? You couldn't have known. You couldn't have stopped a fever. Doesn't matter. I still should have been there. They sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. I'm not going back, Mara said finally. Rowan looked at her. I'm not running anymore either. If they come, I'll stand, with you. However that looks. Something shifted in Rowan's expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. You sure about that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Rowan almost smiled. All right then. They finished dinner and cleaned up together. That night, lying on her pile of furs by the fire, Mara stared at the ceiling and thought about Sarah, about fever and loss, and the ways people break, and about the ways they put themselves back together. The attack came 6 days later. Mara was out gathering firewood when she heard the first shot. The crack echoed through the trees, sharp and unmistakable. She dropped the wood and ran, her heart in her throat. More shots. 3, 4. She burst into the clearing just as Rowan ducked behind the water trough, his rifle in hand. 5 men on horseback were spread out across the clearing, firing at the cabin. Mara recognized Table 4 and Hatchet Face. The others were strangers. Get inside, Rowan shouted. Mara ran for the cabin door. A bullet kicked up dirt 2 feet to her left. She dove through the doorway, hitting the floor hard. Rowan fired twice, and one of the horses reared, throwing its rider. The man hit the ground, cursing. How many? Mara gasped. 5, maybe 6. Another volley of shots. One punched through the window shutter, sending splinters flying. Mara grabbed the revolver from where Rowan kept it on the shelf. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. Breathe, Rowan said. He was reloading, his movements quick and practiced. You remember what I taught you? I think so. Good enough. He moved to the window, peered out, and fired. Someone screamed. Rowan Hale! Table 4's voice loud and mocking. This is your last chance. Send out the girl and we'll leave you be. Rowan didn't answer. He fired again. You can't win this, Table 4 shouted. We've got more men coming. You're outnumbered. Then come get her, Rowan yelled back. Silence. Then the sound of hoofbeats, moving, circling. They're trying to flank us, Rowan muttered. He handed Mara his rifle. You watch the back window. Anyone comes near, you shoot. Don't think. Just shoot. Mara took the rifle. It was heavier than the revolver, solid and real in her hands. She moved to the back window and peered out. At first she saw nothing, just trees and shadows. Then movement. A man creeping along the tree line, pistol in hand. Mara's heart hammered. Her finger found the trigger. The man stepped into the open, heading for the back door. Mara fired. The rifle kicked hard, slamming into her shoulder. The shot went wide, hitting a tree trunk 3 feet from the man. But it was enough. He dove for cover, cursing. Good, Rowan shouted. Keep him pinned! Mara reloaded, clumsily, her hands still shaking, and fired again, and again. The man retreated back into the trees. At the front, Rowan was trading shots with the others. The cabin filled with smoke and noise, the smell of gunpowder thick in the air. And then, as suddenly as it started, the shooting stopped. Silence. Mara's ears rang. She kept the rifle trained on the back window, her whole body tense. Rowan? She whispered. Stay down. Footsteps. Outside. Moving away. Then hoofbeats. Fading. Rowan risked a glance out the front window. They're pulling back. Why? Don't know. Don't care. We need to move. What? They'll be back, with more men, better weapons. He was already grabbing supplies, shoving them into packs. We can't stay here. Where do we go? Higher. There's an old hunting shelter about 10 miles north, harder to reach, easier to defend. Mara's mind was reeling. We're abandoning the cabin? It's just a building, Mara. We're staying alive. He was right. She knew he was right, but it still hurt. They packed fast. Food, ammunition, blankets, anything they could carry. Rowan saddled the horses while Mara took one last look around the cabin. This place had saved her, had given her something she'd never had before, and now she was leaving it behind. Mara, Rowan called. Time to go. She stepped outside. The clearing was empty except for bloodstains in the dirt and spent shell casings glinting in the fading light. They rode north as the sun set, pushing the horses hard. The trail was steep and treacherous, winding through dense forest that seemed to close in around them. Hours passed. The moon rose, pale and cold. Finally, deep in the night, they reached the shelter. A small structure built into the side of a rocky outcrop, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Rowan dismounted and checked inside. It's clear. They unloaded the horses and settled in. The shelter was cramped and cold, but it was shelter. Mara sat on the dirt floor, her whole body aching. We can't keep running, she said. I know. So what do we do? Rowan looked at her, his face half-shadowed in the dim light. We make a choice, he said. We either leave this territory entirely, head west, start over somewhere they can't find us, or we end this. How do you end something like this? By confronting it, by going back to Coldwater and making them answer for what they've done. Mara stared at him. That's suicide. Maybe, maybe not. They'll kill us. They'll try. Rowan, I'm not saying we do it tomorrow, but Mara, listen to me. You can't spend your whole life running. I know. I tried. And it doesn't work. Sooner or later, you have to stand your ground. Mara's hands clenched into fists. Everything in her screamed to run, to disappear, to find some corner of the world where no one would ever find her. But that wasn't living. That was just surviving. And she was so damn tired of just surviving. If we do this, she said slowly, if we go back, how do we even have a chance? We get smart. We get help. And we make sure everyone knows the truth. The truth doesn't matter to people like them. It matters to some people. Marshall Webb, for one. And there are others. People who've been pushed around by men like Eugene Voss. People who are tired of watching bullies win. Mara wanted to believe him. Wanted to believe that truth and justice and doing the right thing actually meant something. But she'd seen too much evidence to the contrary. Still, what other choice did she have? Okay, she whispered. Okay, we'll try. Well, Rowan nodded. Then we rest tonight. Tomorrow, we start planning. They ate cold rations in silence, too exhausted for conversation. When they finished, Mara spread out her bedroll and lay down, staring up at the rough wooden ceiling. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, cold and relentless. And somewhere in the darkness, men were hunting them. But for the first time in her life, Mara wasn't facing it alone. Morning came with frost on the ground and Rowan already awake, crouched by the small fire he'd built just outside the shelter. Mara's whole body ached when she sat up. Muscles she didn't know she had were screaming in protest from yesterday's ride and the gunfight that still felt like a nightmare she couldn't shake. "Coffee's ready?" Rowan said without turning around. Mara wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him by the fire. The coffee was bitter and scalding, but it cleared the fog from her head. "How long have you been up?" "Couple hours. Wanted to make sure we weren't followed." "And?" "Trail's clean, for now." He poured himself another cup. "But they know this area well enough. Won't take them long to start searching the high country." Mara stared into the flames. "So what's the plan?" Rowan pulled out a piece of charcoal and started sketching on a flat piece of bark. "Coldwater's got maybe 300 people. Most of them just trying to survive, same as anywhere. But the ones with power, Eugene, the men who came after us, the town council, they're used to getting their way. So we're outnumbered and outgunned. On paper, yeah, but they've got a weakness. Which is? They think they're untouchable. They think because they've always won, they always will." He added a few marks to his rough map. "Marshall Webb's in Pine Haven. He's not dirty, but he's also not going to stick his neck out without proof. We need to give him something he can't ignore." "Like what?" "Witnesses. People who'll testify that Eugene's been lying, that you didn't steal anything, that those men attacked us without cause." Mara almost laughed. "Who's going to testify against them? Everyone in Coldwater is either scared or bought off." "Not everyone. There's always someone who got stepped on, someone who remembers." Rowan looked at her. "You worked at that saloon for how long?" 2 years? Almost 3. You ever talk to the other workers? The girls upstairs, the cook, anyone?" Mara thought back. There had been others, sure. A rotating cast of desperate people doing desperate work. But most of them had been just as invisible as she was, just as beaten down. Except, there was a woman, Mara said slowly. Clara. She worked the bar sometimes. Eugene fired her about 6 months ago. Said she was stealing, but everyone knew it was because she wouldn't... She trailed off. Wouldn't what? Wouldn't sleep with him. Rowan's expression darkened. Where is she now? I don't know. She mentioned she had family somewhere east. Maybe she went there. We'll find her. Anyone else? Mara racked her brain. The cook, old man named Pete. He hated Eugene, said he was a cheat and a liar. But Pete's got to be 70. I don't know if he'd stand up in front of people. We ask anyway, who else? There's a woman who runs the boarding house, Mrs. Halstead. She's the one I owed rent to, but she never said I stole anything. She knew I lost my job. She honest? Honest enough. But she's also practical. If testifying means losing business or getting on Eugene's bad side, I don't know if she'd do it. Rowan nodded, taking it all in. All right, here's what we do. We go back to Pine Haven first. Talk to Marshall Webb. Lay out what we know. Then we track down these people, get their stories. Build a case so solid he can't ignore it. And if Eugene finds out what we're doing, then we move fast and hope we're faster than he is. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something. They broke camp an hour later, covering their tracks as best they could before heading east. The ride to Pine Haven took most of the day, winding through narrow trails that left Mara's nerves frayed. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a man with a gun. But they reached the town without incident, just as the sun was starting to dip toward the horizon. Marshal Webb was in his office, a cramped room attached to the general store. He looked up from a stack of paperwork when they walked in, his expression going from surprise to resignation. "Rowan, Mara." He set down his pen. "I heard about the attack on your cabin." "News travels fast," Rowan said. "It does when 5 men ride into town with bullet wounds and wild stories about being ambushed by a crazy mountain man." Webb leaned back in his chair. "They're saying you fired first, that they were just trying to serve a legal writ." "That's a lie," Mara said. "I figured as much, but I need more than your word against theirs." Rowan stepped forward. "That's why we're here. We want to clear this up, officially." Webb's eyebrows rose. "You willing to come in? Make a statement?" "We are, but we're also going to bring you witnesses, people who can prove Eugene Voss has been lying about Mara, about the theft, about all of it." "You got names?" Rowan rattled off the names Mara had given him. Clara, Pete, Mrs. Halstead. Webb wrote them down. "I'll put out word I want to talk to them. But Rowan, you need to understand something. Even if they all back your story, Eugene's got friends. Rich friends. The kind who can make problems disappear." "Then we make this too big to disappear." "How?" "We make it public. Get people talking. Make sure everyone knows what's really going on." Webb shook his head. "You're playing a dangerous game." "We don't have a choice." The marshal studied them both for a long moment. Then he sighed. "All right, I'll help where I can, but you're on your own if this goes sideways." "Fair enough." They left the office and found a room at the small boarding house on the edge of town. It was clean but sparse. 2 narrow beds, a washstand, a single window overlooking the street. Mara sat on one of the beds, suddenly exhausted. "You think this will work?" "Don't know, but we're committed now." That night, Mara barely slept. Every creak of the building, every voice from the street made her sit up, heart racing. Rowan slept in the chair by the door, his rifle across his lap, keeping watch. The next morning, Marshal Webb sent word that he'd found Pete. The old cook was living in a small shack behind the blacksmith shop, doing odd jobs for food and a place to sleep. Mara and Rowan found him there, bent over a chopping block, splitting kindling with shaking hands. "Pete?" Mara said. The old man looked up, squinting, then his weathered face split into a gap-toothed smile. "Mara? That really you, girl?" "It's me." He set down the axe and shuffled over, looking her up and down. "You look different, stronger. Mountain air agrees with you." I need your help, Pete." His smile faded. "This about Eugene?" "Yeah." Pete spat into the dirt. "That bastard. What did he do now?" Mara explained everything, the lies, the wanted notice, the attack on the cabin. Pete listened, his expression growing darker with every word. "He always was a snake," Pete said when she finished. "But I didn't think he'd go this far." "Will you testify? Tell the marshal what you know?" Pete was quiet for a long time, staring at his gnarled hands. "I'm an old man, Mara. I got maybe 5 years left if I'm lucky, and those years are hard enough without making enemies." Mara's heart sank. "But," Pete continued, "I also got nothing left to lose. Eugene already took my job, my dignity, damn near everything else. So yeah, I'll testify. I'll tell them he's a lying cheat who skims money and blames it on his workers. I'll tell them about the times I saw him hit you when you dropped a plate or didn't move fast enough." Mara's throat tightened. "He hit me once. I thought no one saw." "I saw. And I did nothing. Been carrying that guilt ever since." Pete looked her in the eye. "Let me make it right." They brought Pete to the marshal's office, where he gave his statement. Webb wrote it all down, his pen scratching across paper. When Pete finished, Webb looked up. "This is good, but I need more. One witness isn't enough to counter 5 men swearing otherwise." "We're working on it," Rowan said. Finding Clara proved harder. Nobody in Pine Haven knew where she'd gone. But Webb had contacts, other lawmen, travelers, people who kept their ears open. He sent telegrams, asked around, pulled favors. 3 days later, they got word. Clara was working at a hotel in a town called Ridgemont, about 30 miles south. Mara and Rowan rode out the next morning. Ridgemont was bigger than Pine Haven but smaller than Coldwater, a logging town perched on the edge of a river. The hotel was a 2-story building with peeling paint and a crooked sign. They found Clara in the kitchen, elbow deep in dishwater. She turned when Mara said her name and for a moment didn't recognize her. Then her eyes widened. "Mara?" "Hi, Clara." Clara dried her hands on her apron, looking between Mara and Rowan. "What are you doing here?" "I need your help." They sat in the hotel's empty dining room and Mara laid it all out. Clara listened without interrupting, her expression hard to read. When Mara finished, Clara was quiet for a long time. "I knew something like this would happen," she said finally. "Eugene doesn't like it when people leave, especially when they leave on their own terms. Will you help us? Will you testify?" Clara's jaw tightened. "You know what he did to me, right? After he fired me." Mara shook her head. "He spread rumors. Told everyone I was a whore, that I'd been stealing from customers, that I had some kind of disease. I couldn't get work anywhere in Coldwater. That's why I left." Her voice shook with barely contained anger. "He destroyed my life because I said no to him. Then helped me destroy his." Clara looked at her, really looked at her. Then she nodded. Yeah, I will." They brought Clara back to Pine Haven. She gave her statement to Marshal Webb, and this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. She named names, described events, painted a picture of Eugene Voss as exactly what he was, a petty tyrant who used his position to hurt anyone who got in his way. Webb set down his pen when she finished. "This is good, real good. Between you, Pete, and Mrs. Halstead. We haven't talked to Mrs. Halstead yet," Mara said. "Don't need to. She came in yesterday. Gave a statement on her own." Mara's eyes widened. "What?" "Said she heard what was happening and wanted to set the record straight. Said you never stole from her, never caused trouble, and the only reason you left without paying was because Eugene fired you without cause." Webb smiled grimly. "She also said Eugene's been pressuring her to lie, threatened to pull his business from her boarding house if she didn't back his story. She's tired of being pushed around." Hope flared in Mara's chest. "So what now?" "Now I take this to the territorial judge. File formal charges against Eugene and the men who attacked you. It'll take a few weeks to process, but..." The door slammed open. Table 4 stood in the doorway, flanked by mean eyes and 2 men Mara didn't recognize. All of them were armed. Well, Table 4 said. "Looks like we found what we were looking for." Webb stood up, his hand moving toward his gun. "You men need to leave, now." "We're not going anywhere. We got a legal writ for Mara Klein's arrest. She's coming with us." "I haven't seen any writ." Table 4 pulled a folded document from his coat and tossed it on the desk. "There. All official and legal." Webb unfolded it, his expression darkening. "This is signed by Judge Carver." "That's right." "Judge Carver's in Eugene's pocket," Rowan said quietly. Webb's jaw worked. He looked at the document, then at the 4 armed men, then at Mara. "I need to verify this," he said. "Could take a few days." "We're not waiting a few days," Mean Eyes growled. "You'll wait as long as I tell you to wait." Table 4's hand moved toward his pistol. "I don't think so." Rowan stepped in front of Mara, his rifle coming up in one smooth motion. The room went deadly silent. "Anyone draws, this gets messy," Rowan said. His voice was calm, almost conversational. But there was steel underneath. Table 4 grinned. "You can't shoot all of us before one of us shoots you." "Maybe, but you'll be the first one I put down. Guarantee it." The grin faded. Webb moved between them, hands raised. "Everyone calm down. Nobody's drawing, nobody's shooting. We're going to handle this legal and proper." "The law says she's under arrest," Table 4 said. "The law says I verify the writ before making an arrest. And that's what I'm going to do." Webb's voice was firm. "You men can wait in town or ride back to Coldwater. Your choice. But you're not taking her today." Table 4's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake, Marshal." "Won't be my first." The 4 men stood there for another tense moment. Then Table 4 jerked his head toward the door. "Let's go." They filed out, but not before Table 4 turned back. "This isn't over." "Never is," Webb said. When they were gone, Webb sagged against his desk. That writ's real. Or real enough. Judge Carver wouldn't forge it, but he'd sign anything Eugene put in front of him. So what do we do? Mara asked. Her voice was shaking. We move faster than they do. I'll send a telegram to the territorial capital, get someone higher up involved. But Mara, you and Rowan need to lay low. If those men come back with more numbers, I can't stop them. Where do we go? Rowan was already moving toward the door. Back to the mountains, where they can't find us. For how long? As long as it takes. They left Pine Haven that night under cover of darkness, taking back trails and moving fast. Mara kept expecting to hear hoofbeats behind them, to feel a bullet slam into her back. But they made it to the high country without incident. Rowan led them to a different shelter this time, even more remote than the first. It was barely more than a lean-to built against a cliff face, but it was hidden and defensible. We wait here, Rowan said. Give Webb time to work. And if he can't fix this? Rowan didn't answer. He didn't need to. They settled into a grim routine. Rowan hunted and set snares while Mara gathered firewood and kept watch. At night, they'd sit by the small fire and talk. About nothing, about everything. Rowan told her stories about his daughter, about the life he'd had before loss carved him hollow. Mara told him about growing up in a mining camp, about losing her parents to a collapse when she was 12, about the years of drifting from town to town looking for work that paid enough to survive. You never thought about leaving? Rowan asked one night. Going somewhere bigger, somewhere with more opportunity? With what money? And even if I had it, where would I go? Cities don't want people like me either. You're different now. Am I? Yeah. You're not invisible anymore. Mara poked at the fire with a stick. Sometimes I wish I still was. Being seen means being a target. Being seen also means mattering. She looked at him. Is that why you helped me? Because you wanted me to matter? I helped you because someone should have helped me. And because you reminded me that I'm not dead yet. You were never dead. Felt like it. A week passed, then two. Marshal Webb sent word through a trapper who passed by. He was making progress, had gotten the territorial prosecutor interested, but it would take time they might not have. On the 15th day, Rowan went down to Pine Haven to check in with Webb and get supplies. He came back 3 hours later, his face grim. What happened? Mara asked. Eugene's escalating. He's offering $100 now, and he's got more men, 8, maybe 10. They're combing the high country. Mara's stomach dropped. They'll find us. Eventually, yeah. So what do we do? Rowan sat down heavily. We have two choices. We run, really run, leave the territory entirely, start over somewhere else. Or we end this now. How? We go to Coldwater. We face them directly. Mara stared at him. That's insane. Maybe. But Webb's working the legal angle. We work the public one. We go into town, we stand in front of everyone, and we make Eugene answer for what he's done. We make it so public, so visible, that he can't just make us disappear. He'll have us killed. He'll try. But if we're smart, if we're careful, we can stack the deck in our favor. How? Rowan leaned forward. We get there when the town's busy. Saturday afternoon, market day, lots of people around. We bring Pete, Clara, Mrs. Halstead. We make them tell their stories in front of everyone. We force a reckoning. And if Eugene refuses, if he just has his men grab us, then we fight. Right there in the street. And we make damn sure everyone sees who started it. It was a terrible plan. Reckless. Dangerous. But staying up here hiding wasn't working either. When? Mara asked. This Saturday, 3 days. Mara's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her knees to still them. Okay, we do it. Rowan nodded. I'll get word to the others. Tell them to meet us there. You think they'll come? Clara will. Pete probably will. Mrs. Halstead. I don't know. But even 2 witnesses are better than none. The next 3 days were the longest of Mara's life. She barely slept, her mind racing through every possible outcome. Most of them ended with her dead or in chains, but some didn't. Some ended with her standing tall, free, and vindicated. She had to believe those were possible. Saturday morning came cold and clear. They rode down from the mountains at first light, meeting Clara and Pete on the trail outside Pine Haven. Clara looked scared but determined. Pete looked like he was ready to fight. "Mrs. Halstead?" Mara asked. "Already in Coldwater," Pete said. "Sent word she'd meet us there." They rode together, a strange group of misfits and outcasts heading toward a confrontation none of them wanted, but all of them needed. As they crested the final ridge and Coldwater came into view, Mara's breath caught. The town looked exactly as she remembered. Muddy streets, crooked buildings, the saloon sign creaking in the wind. But it didn't scare her the way it used to. She wasn't the same girl who'd left here months ago. That girl had been small and silent and invisible. This girl had learned to shoot, to ride, to stand her ground. This girl had found people worth fighting for. And she'd be damned if she was going to let Eugene Voss take that away. They rode into town at noon when the streets were packed with people buying and selling, trading and gossiping. Every head turned to watch them pass. Rowan led them straight to the town square, a small open space in front of the general store. He dismounted and helped Mara down. Clara and Pete flanked them. And then Eugene Voss stepped out of the saloon, flanked by Table 4 and 6 other men, all of them armed. "Well," Eugene said, his voice dripping with false warmth, "look who decided to come home." Mara stepped forward, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "I'm not home. I'm here to tell the truth." Eugene's smile didn't waver. "The truth? The truth is you're a thief and a liar, and now you're under arrest." "No," Mara said. "I'm not." And she started talking. Mara's voice rang out across the square, louder than she'd ever spoken in her life. The crowd that had been milling around the market stalls went quiet, heads turning, people stopping mid-conversation to stare. "I worked at the Red Pine Saloon for almost 3 years," she said. 14-hour days, sometimes 16. Eugene Voss paid me 12 cents for a full day's work. He docked my pay if I ate food. He hit me when I made mistakes. And when I finally couldn't take it anymore and left, he called me a thief to cover his own crimes. Eugene's face went red. "That's a lie. I never—" "You want to talk about lies?" Clara stepped forward, her voice cutting through Eugene's protest. "Tell them what you did to me, Eugene. Tell them why you really fired me." Eugene's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Clara turned to the crowd. "He fired me because I wouldn't sleep with him. Then he told everyone I was diseased, that I stole from customers, that I was worthless. I couldn't get work anywhere in this town because of his lies." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Mara saw faces she recognized, people who'd been at the saloon, people who'd looked right through her like she didn't exist. Now they were listening. "That's ridiculous," Eugene sputtered. "She was stealing. I caught her red-handed." "Then where's your proof?" Pete's voice was rough as gravel. The old cook stepped forward, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "You always got proof of everything when it suits you. Bills, receipts, ledgers. So show us the proof she stole." Eugene's jaw worked. "I don't need to prove anything to you people." "Yes, you do." Mrs. Halstead emerged from the crowd, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression carved from stone. "Because you've been lying about Mara Klein, and I won't stand for it anymore." The boarding house owner's appearance sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Mrs. Halstead was respectable, established, someone people trusted. "Mara owed me rent," Mrs. Halstead continued. $3. That's true. But she didn't steal from me. She didn't damage anything. She lost her job and couldn't pay. That's not a crime. And Eugene here," she pointed a bony finger at him, "has been pressuring me for weeks to say she stole linens and silverware, threatened to move all his business elsewhere if I didn't back his story." Eugene's face had gone from red to purple. "You're all conspiring against me, every damn one of you." "Or maybe," Rowan said quietly, "you're just a bully who finally got called out." Eugene's hand moved toward the pistol at his belt. Rowan's rifle came up in one smooth motion. "Don't." Table 4 and the other men spread out, hands hovering over their own weapons. The crowd scattered, people backing away from the center of the square, parents grabbing children and ducking behind wagons and barrels. Mara's heart hammered in her chest. This was it. The moment where everything either worked or fell apart spectacularly. She could feel the weight of every eye on her, could see the fear in people's faces, the uncertainty. "You won't shoot," Eugene said. But his voice wavered, and Mara heard the doubt underneath. Try me, Rowan said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but there was steel running through it. The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity. Mara's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, forcing herself to stand tall, to not back down. Not now. Not after they'd come this far. Table 4's hand inched closer to his gun. Mean Eyes shifted his weight, preparing to draw. The other men looked nervous, glancing at each other, clearly not as committed to this fight as Eugene was. Then a new voice cut through the tension. "What in the hell is going on here?" Marshal Webb rode into the square on a lathered horse, his face thunderous. Behind him rode 2 other men, one wearing a territorial marshal's badge, the other in a suit that marked him as someone official, someone important. Eugene's expression shifted from anger to something like relief. "Marshal Webb. Thank heavens. This woman is wanted for theft and—" "Save it, Eugene!" Webb dismounted and walked straight to the center of the square, his boots striking the packed dirt with authority. "This is Marshal Garrett from the Territorial Office. And this is Prosecutor Hayes. They've been investigating your claims." The man in the suit, Hayes, pulled out a leather folder and opened it with deliberate slowness. "Mr. Voss? We've taken statements from multiple witnesses regarding your accusations against Miss Klein. We've also reviewed the financial records you submitted to Judge Carver." Eugene's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The records showing theft from your establishment. The ones you used to justify a warrant for Miss Klein's arrest." Hayes looked up, his eyes cold. "They're fraudulent." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. People who'd been backing away started pressing closer again, wanting to hear everything. "That's impossible," Eugene said, his voice cracked. "I keep meticulous records." "You do, which is how we know these were doctored. The numbers don't match your tax filings. The dates don't align with your supply orders. And 3 separate witnesses have testified that you routinely skim money and blame it on your workers." Hayes closed the folder with a snap. "You're under investigation for fraud, coercion, and filing false reports." Eugene looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His face went from pale to ashen. "This is absurd. You can't—" "We can. And we are." Marshal Garrett stepped forward, his hand resting on his own pistol. "Mr. Voss, you need to come with us." "I'm not going anywhere." Eugene's hand went to his pistol, fingers closing around the grip. Table 4 and the others drew their weapons in a ragged chorus of clicks and scrapes. Rowan's rifle stayed trained on Eugene. Webb and Garrett drew their own guns. The square was a powder keg, one spark away from exploding into violence. Mara could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. "Eugene!" Mrs. Halstead's voice cut through the standoff, surprisingly gentle. "For once in your miserable life, do the right thing. Put down the gun." Eugene looked at her, then at the crowd, then at the 3 lawmen with weapons drawn. His hand trembled on the pistol grip. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. For a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then slowly, painfully, Eugene lowered the pistol and let it drop to the ground. "Smart choice," Garrett said. He gestured to Table 4 and the others. "You men too. Weapons down. Now." One by one, they complied. Table 4 was the last, his face twisted with rage, but even he couldn't fight 3 marshals and a crowd of witnesses. Garrett moved forward and put Eugene in handcuffs, the metal clicking shut with a finality that seemed to echo across the square. "Eugene Voss, you're under arrest for fraud, filing false reports, assault, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." Garrett's voice was formal, official. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "I know my damn rights," Eugene spat. As Garrett led him toward the horses, Eugene locked eyes with Mara. The hatred there was pure and venomous, burning with an intensity that made her take an involuntary step back. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Yeah," Mara said, forcing herself to meet his stare. "It is." They loaded Eugene onto a horse, his hands cuffed in front of him. Garrett took Table 4 and Mean Eyes as well, citing them as accomplices in the attack on Rowan's cabin. The other men scattered into the crowd, clearly wanting no part of whatever legal troubles were coming. Marshal Webb walked over to Mara, his expression somewhere between impressed and exasperated. "You've got a talent for making things complicated." "Didn't mean to. Never do." He looked at Rowan. You planning to stick around? For a bit? Want to see this through? Webb nodded. Prosecutor Hayes wants statements from all of you. Formal ones, for the trial. There's going to be a trial? Clara asked, her voice uncertain. If Hayes has his way, yeah. Eugene's got friends, but fraud's fraud. Hard to wriggle out of when the evidence is this clear. Webb tipped his hat. You all did good today. Took guts to stand up like that. As the lawmen prepared to ride out with their prisoners, the crowd began to shift. Some people dispersed, heading back to their daily business. But others stayed, and slowly, hesitantly, they approached Mara. An older woman Mara vaguely recognized from the general store clasped her hand. I'm sorry, child. We should have done something. You're doing something now, Mara said. The woman's eyes glistened with tears. Still, we let you down. We let a lot of people down. A younger man stepped forward, hat in his hands. I worked at the livery stable. Saw Eugene hit you once when you were bringing back bottles. I didn't say nothing. I should have. It's all right, Mara said, though it wasn't. Not really. But what good would anger do now? More people came. Not everyone. Some still looked at her with suspicion or contempt, still believed Eugene's lies or just didn't care. But enough came that Mara felt something shift, not just in the town but in herself. She wasn't invisible anymore. For better or worse, people saw her now. A middle-aged woman with tired eyes and work-roughened hands approached last. My name's Ruth. I clean houses. Eugene said things about you, and I believed him because it was easier than questioning him. She swallowed hard. I'm sorry. And if you ever need anything, you come find me. I owe you that much. You don't owe me anything, Mara said. Maybe not, but I'm offering anyway. As the afternoon wore on, the square gradually emptied. Mara, Rowan, Clara, and Pete ended up sitting on the steps of the general store, exhausted and still processing what had happened. I can't believe that actually worked, Clara said. She was shaking, the adrenaline finally draining away. It almost didn't, Pete said. If Webb hadn't shown up when he did. But he did, Rowan said, and now Eugene's the one in chains instead of us. Mara stared at the spot where Eugene had stood, where he'd tried to have her arrested, tried to maintain his power over her. That spot was empty now, just dirt and scattered footprints. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait, Rowan said. Give statements. Let the law do its job. And if the law doesn't work, if Eugene gets off somehow, Rowan's expression darkened. Then we figure something else out. But Mara, you need to understand, what happened today changes things. You stood up in front of the whole town. You told the truth. Even if Eugene walks, people know now. They saw you. They heard you. That's not nothing. Maybe he was right. Maybe just being seen, being heard, was its own kind of victory. That evening, they gathered at the boarding house. Mrs. Halstead had offered them rooms, refusing to take payment. Consider it an apology, she said gruffly, for not standing up sooner, for letting fear keep me quiet. You stood up when it mattered, Mara said. Did I? Or did I just do what I should have done months ago? Mrs. Halstead shook her head. Either way, you've got rooms for as long as you need them. They ate dinner together in the small dining room, Mara, Rowan, Clara, Pete, and Mrs. Halstead. The meal was simple but filling, and for the first time in months, Mara felt like she could actually taste the food, could actually relax enough to enjoy it. What will you do after the trial? Mrs. Halstead asked Clara. Clara shrugged. Haven't thought that far ahead. I've got my job in Ridgemont. Guess I'll go back there. You could stay here, Mrs. Halstead said. I could use help running this place. The pay's not much, but it's honest work and you'd have a room. A real one, not some closet. Clara's eyes widened. You're serious? I don't say things I don't mean. You'd be doing me a favor, honestly. I'm getting too old to manage everything myself. A slow smile spread across Clara's face. Okay, yeah, I'd like that. Pete chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. Look at that. Something good coming out of all this mess. What about you, Pete? Mara asked. You've got a place to stay? Blacksmith lets me sleep in his shed. It's not much, but it's dry. He waved a gnarled hand. Don't worry about me. I've survived this long. I'll keep surviving. You shouldn't have to just survive, Mrs. Halstead said. There's a room here if you want it. Small, but it's got a real bed and a stove. Pete's eyes went suspiciously bright. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. I've got the space and you've earned it. Besides, she smiled slightly, I could use someone to help keep the firewood split and the repairs done. My back's not what it used to be. Pete nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and memories, some painful, some almost funny in retrospect. It felt strange to sit there, safe and warm, talking openly about things that had happened in this very town. Eventually, exhaustion won. Clara and Pete headed to their rooms. Mrs. Halstead excused herself to handle the evening's accounts. Mara and Rowan stayed at the table, nursing cups of lukewarm coffee. You could stay too, Mara said quietly. In town, I mean. You don't have to go back to the cabin. Could, Rowan acknowledged. But mountains are home. Town's just where I visit when I have to. What about me? The question came out before Mara could stop it. Where's home for me? Rowan looked at her, really looked at her. Where do you want it to be? Mara didn't know how to answer that. A few months ago, home had been whatever place she could afford to sleep. Before that, it had been the tiny room above the boarding house. Before that, nothing at all. But the cabin in the mountains, that had felt like something different, something more. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to go back up with you, back to the quiet and the trees and the space. But part of me feels like I need to be here, at least for a while, to see this through, to make sure people remember what happened. Then do both, Rowan said simply. How? Stay here through the trial. Make sure your story gets heard. Then come back up when you're ready. The cabin's not going anywhere, and neither am I. It sounded so simple when he said it like that. Like she didn't have to choose, didn't have to commit to one life or the other. You mean that? She asked. Mara, when have I ever said something I didn't mean? She smiled despite herself. Never. Exactly. So stop worrying about it. Take things one day at a time. That's all any of us can do. The next morning, Marshal Webb came by with Prosecutor Hayes. They set up in Mrs. Halstead's dining room, turning it into a makeshift office. Hayes was a meticulous man, probably in his mid-40s, with sharp eyes and a way of asking questions that made you think carefully before answering. He interviewed each of them separately, writing everything down in neat, careful script. When it was Mara's turn, she told him everything. Not just about the theft accusations and Eugene's lies, but about the years before, the low pay, the verbal abuse, the casual cruelty that had been so constant she'd almost stopped noticing it. Hayes listened without interrupting, his pen scratching across paper. When she finished, he looked up. Miss Klein, I want you to understand something. This trial is going to be difficult. Eugene Voss has money and connections. He'll hire good lawyers who will try to tear apart your credibility. They'll bring up your background, your poverty, anything they can use to make the jury doubt you. I know, Mara said. And you're still willing to testify? I am. Why? You could disappear back into the mountains. Start over somewhere else. Why put yourself through this? Mara thought about that. Because if I don't, he wins. He gets to keep hurting people, keeps getting away with it. And because maybe if I stand up, it makes it easier for the next person to stand up too. Hayes smiled slightly. Good answer. The jury will like that. Over the next few days, they prepared. Hayes coached them on how to testify, how to answer questions without getting defensive, how to stay calm under cross-examination. They'll try to make you angry, he told Mara. Try to get you to say something emotional or impulsive. Don't take the bait. Stay factual. Stay calm. Tell the truth and let the truth do the work. Easier said than done, but Mara tried to absorb it all. Word spread through Coldwater about the upcoming trial. Opinions were divided. Some people thought Eugene was getting what he deserved. Others thought the whole thing was nonsense, that Mara and the others were just troublemakers trying to bring down a successful businessman. One afternoon, Mara was walking back to the boarding house when she ran into a group of women outside the general store. She recognized a few of them, wives of merchants, respectable women who'd never acknowledged her existence before. One of them, a thin woman with a pinched face, stepped into Mara's path. You should be ashamed of yourself, the woman said. Eugene Voss is a pillar of this community, and you're trying to destroy him with lies. Mara took a breath. remembering Hayes's advice. Stay calm. I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth about what he did to me and others. You're a bitter woman who couldn't keep a job. That's all you are. I kept that job for 3 years under conditions you couldn't imagine. Conditions you probably deserved, another woman chimed in. The old Mara would have shrunk away, would have accepted the insults and hurried past. But the old Mara was gone. You don't know me, Mara said firmly. You've never known me. You looked right through me for years and now you're offended that I'm finally visible? That I'm finally speaking up about how I was treated? We're offended that you're attacking a good man. If he's such a good man, why did he lie about me? Why did he lie about Clara? Why did he doctor his financial records? Mara stepped closer. Or do you not care about the truth, as long as it doesn't inconvenience you? The women looked taken aback. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like Mara. You're going to regret this, the pinched-faced woman said. Maybe, Mara agreed, but at least I'll regret telling the truth instead of regretting staying silent. She walked past them, her heart pounding, but her head held high. That night she told Rowan about the encounter. You handled it right, he said. Can't control what people think, can only control what you do. I hate that they think I'm the bad person in this. Some people always will. They've got too much invested in the way things are. Change scares them. He looked at her. But there are others who see what you're doing and understand. Those are the ones who matter. The trial was set for 6 weeks out, giving Hayes time to build his case and prepare his witnesses. In the meantime, life in Coldwater continued in a strange, suspended way. Mara helped Mrs. Halstead around the boarding house, earning her keep. Clara started working there officially. Pete did odd jobs and repairs. Rowan mostly stayed close, keeping watch, making sure nobody tried anything stupid. Marshall Webb stopped by regularly, updating them on Eugene's situation. The businessman was being held in the territorial capital, unable to make bail because of the seriousness of the charges. He's trying to cut a deal, Webb told them one afternoon, offering to plead guilty to lesser charges if the prosecution drops the fraud allegations. Is Hayes considering it? Mara asked, her stomach sinking. No. He wants the full trial, wants all of it on record. Says this is bigger than just Eugene. It's about establishing precedent for how these cases are handled. Mara wasn't sure if that made her feel better or worse. 3 weeks before the trial, something unexpected happened. A woman showed up at the boarding house asking for Mara. She was young, maybe 20, with dark circles under her eyes and a baby in her arms. My name's Elizabeth, she said. I heard what you did. Standing up to Eugene, I need to tell someone what he did to me. Mara brought her inside. They sat in the kitchen while Elizabeth told her story, how she'd worked at the Saloon 2 years ago, how Eugene had forced himself on her, how when she got pregnant he'd fired her and spread rumors that she was a prostitute. I never told anyone, Elizabeth said, tears streaming down her face. I was too ashamed, too scared. But when I heard you were taking him to court, I thought, maybe it's not too late. Maybe someone will finally believe me. Mara held her hand. I believe you. They brought Elizabeth to Prosecutor Hayes. He listened to her story with the same careful attention he'd given everyone else. This is serious, he said when she finished. If you're willing to testify, this adds another dimension to the case. But I need to warn you, it will be even harder for you than for the others. Defense lawyers will attack your credibility viciously. I don't care, Elizabeth said. I want him to pay for what he did. Hayes added her to the witness list. That night, Mara lay awake thinking about Elizabeth, about Clara, about herself. How many women had Eugene hurt over the years? How many had stayed silent because speaking up seemed impossible? The answer made her sick, but it also strengthened her resolve. This trial wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about every person Eugene had victimized, every lie he'd told, every abuse of power he'd gotten away with. The weeks crawled by. Hayes continued preparing, drilling his witnesses, building his case brick by methodical brick. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. They traveled to the territorial capital, a growing city about 2 days' ride from Coldwater. The courthouse was a substantial brick building, far more imposing than anything in the small towns Mara was used to. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. Mara recognized some faces from Coldwater, supporters and detractors alike. Others were strangers, people drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Eugene sat at the defense table with two expensive-looking lawyers. He'd lost weight during his time in jail, his face gaunt and pale. When he saw Mara, his expression twisted with hatred. Judge Morrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s, called the court to order. The trial began. Hayes laid out his case methodically. He presented the doctored financial records, showing point by point how they didn't match Eugene's other documentation. He called the county assessor who testified about discrepancies in Eugene's tax filings. Then he called his character witnesses. Pete went first, testifying about Eugene's pattern of blaming workers for his own theft, about the abuse he'd witnessed. Then Clara, who told her story with quiet dignity, never wavering even when Eugene's lawyers tried to trip her up on cross-examination. Then Mrs. Halstead, whose respectability and community standing gave weight to everything she said. Then Elizabeth, whose testimony brought several jury members to tears. Finally, on the third day, Hayes called Mara. She walked to the witness stand on shaking legs, trying to remember everything Hayes had taught her. Stay calm, stick to the facts, tell the truth. Hayes led her through her story gently. Her years at the saloon, the working conditions, Eugene's behavior, the lies that came after she left. "Miss Klein," Hayes said, "why did you leave your employment at the Red Pine Saloon?" "Because I couldn't survive there anymore. The pay was too low, the treatment was too harsh, and when I stood up for myself even slightly, Eugene fired me." "And when you left, did you take anything that wasn't yours?" "No, I had nothing to take. Everything I owned fit in my pockets." Eugene's lead lawyer, a slick man named Patterson, stood for cross-examination. "Miss Klein, isn't it true that you were fired for poor performance?" "No, I was fired because Eugene wanted to punish me for leaving." "You have quite the imagination. Tell me, how much did you earn at the saloon?" 12 cents for a 14-hour day, sometimes less. And yet you stayed for 3 years. If the conditions were so terrible, why not leave sooner?" "Because I had nowhere else to go. No money, no options. When you're desperate, you endure things you shouldn't have to endure." Patterson smirked. "Or perhaps you stayed because the job wasn't actually as bad as you're claiming now." "I stayed because survival doesn't leave you many choices. That doesn't make the job good. It just makes me desperate." The lawyer tried several more angles, but Mara held firm. She answered every question honestly, refused to be provoked into anger, stayed focused on the truth. When she finally stepped down, she felt drained but oddly calm. She'd said what needed saying, the rest was up to the jury. The trial lasted 2 weeks total. Eugene's lawyers brought their own witnesses, business associates who vouched for his character. Judge Carver, who defended signing the warrant, a few people from Coldwater who claimed Mara, and the others were troublemakers. But Hayes systematically dismantled their testimony, showing connections to Eugene, financial incentives, reasons to lie. The closing arguments came on a Friday afternoon. Patterson painted Eugene as a victim of a conspiracy, a successful businessman targeted by disgruntled former employees. Hayes painted a different picture, a pattern of abuse, exploitation, and lies spanning years, all backed by documented evidence and credible testimony. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Hayes said in his closing, "this case is about more than theft or fraud. It's about power, about what happens when someone with authority uses that authority to hurt those beneath them." Eugene Voss thought he was untouchable, thought he could lie, steal, and abuse without consequence. Your verdict today will show him, and everyone watching, whether he was right. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they filed back in, Mara's heart was in her throat. She sat between Rowan and Clara, their hands linked together. The foreman stood. "On the charge of fraud, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of filing false reports?" "Guilty." "On the charge of assault?" "Guilty." "On the charge of sexual assault?" "Guilty." With each guilty verdict, Mara felt something loosen in her chest. By the time the foreman finished reading all 7 verdicts, all guilty, she was crying openly. Eugene's face had gone white. His lawyers immediately began calling for appeals, but Judge Morrison banged his gavel. "Mr. Voss, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in the territorial prison, with an additional 5 years of probation upon release. You are also ordered to pay restitution to all affected parties in the amount of," he consulted his notes, $3,400. Eugene looked like he might be sick. Furthermore, Morrison continued, your business license is revoked. You are prohibited from operating any establishment serving alcohol or employing vulnerable workers, and your property in Coldwater will be seized to satisfy your debts and restitution obligations. They led Eugene out in chains. This time he didn't look at Mara, didn't say anything, just shuffled out like a broken man. Outside the courthouse, they were mobbed by people, some congratulating them, some asking questions, reporters wanting statements. Hayes extracted them from the crowd and led them to a quiet restaurant nearby. You did it, he said, raising a glass of water and toast. All of you. That was one of the strongest cases I've ever prosecuted, and it was strong because you were brave enough to tell the truth. Thank you, Mara said, for believing us, for fighting for us. That's my job. But you made it easy by being credible, consistent, and honest. He smiled. What will you do now? Mara looked at Rowan, at Clara, at Pete. Live, she said simply. Just live. They stayed in the capital for a few more days, handling paperwork and finalizing details. The restitution money would take time to collect, but Hayes was confident they'd eventually see it. Finally, they headed back. Clara and Pete returned to Coldwater, to their new lives at Mrs. Halstead's boarding house. Mara and Rowan rode toward the mountains. But before they left civilization entirely, they stopped in Pine Haven. Marshal Webb was waiting for them. Heard the news, he said, grinning. Well done. Couldn't have done it without you, Mara said. Nonsense, I just pointed you in the right direction. You did the rest. He pulled out a folded paper. Got something for you, from the territory. Mara unfolded it. It was an official commendation signed by the territorial governor, recognizing her courage in exposing corruption and seeking justice. It's just a piece of paper, Webb said, but it's official recognition that you did the right thing. Might matter someday. Mara folded it carefully and tucked it away. Thank you for everything. Take care of yourself up there. And Mara, if you ever need anything, you know where to find me. They rode out that afternoon, climbing into the mountains as the sun set behind them. The trail was familiar now, comforting in its difficulty. When they finally reached the clearing where the cabin had stood, where the ruin still sat, charred and broken, Mara dismounted and looked at it for a long time. Home? Rowan asked. Home, Mara agreed. Time to rebuild. And as the first stars appeared overhead, she knew that's exactly what they'd do. Not just rebuild a cabin, but rebuild their lives. Stronger this time. Better. Because they'd faced the worst and survived. And that meant they could survive anything. The work of rebuilding began the next morning with the first light filtering through the pines. Mara stood in the clearing, surveying the charred remains of what had been home, and felt an odd mix of sadness and determination. The old cabin was gone, but that didn't mean they couldn't build something better. Rowan was already moving, pulling usable timber from the wreckage, sorting through what could be salvaged and what needed to be hauled away. He worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd done this kind of work before, someone who understood that progress came one piece at a time. We'll need more logs, he said, straightening up and wiping soot from his hands. The beams are shot. Most of the wall logs, too. We're basically starting from scratch. How long will it take? With just the two of us? 3 months, maybe 4. If we had help, could cut that in half. Mara looked around the clearing at the mountains rising endlessly in every direction and made a decision. Then let's get help. They spent the next week doing preliminary work, clearing the site completely, digging a new foundation that would be more stable than the old one, cutting and dragging logs from the surrounding forest. It was brutal, exhausting work that left Mara's muscles screaming and her hands covered in new blisters that formed over old calluses. But she didn't complain. This was different from the work she'd done at the saloon. This was building something that belonged to her, creating something that would shelter and protect. Every log she helped drag, every stone she helped position, was an investment in a future she was choosing for herself. On the 8th day, riders appeared on the trail. Mara's hand went instinctively to the rifle leaning against a nearby tree, but Rowan shook his head. I know them. 3 men rode into the clearing, trappers by the look of them, weathered and rough but with friendly eyes. The one in front, a bearded giant of a man, grinned when he saw Rowan. Heard you had some trouble, the man said, dismounting. Thought you might need a hand. Garrett, Rowan said, clasping the man's hand. Didn't expect to see you until fall. Plans change. This is my brother Samuel, and that ugly bastard is Tom. The other two men waved. We heard what happened in Coldwater. Whole territory's talking about it. Woman who stood up to a crooked businessman and won? That's the kind of story people remember. Mara felt her face heat. It wasn't just me. Don't matter. You're the one people are talking about. Garrett looked around the clearing. Figured you could use some help rebuilding. We've got time before trapping season starts. I can't pay you, Mara said. Didn't ask for pay. Rowan pulled me out of a bad situation once. Time to return the favor. He spat into the dirt. Besides, I never liked that Eugene fellow. Met him once in Pine Haven. Pompous ass. With 3 more sets of hands, the work went faster. They fell into a rhythm, cutting logs in the morning when the air was cool, hauling and positioning them in the afternoon, planning and problem-solving in the evening around the fire. The trappers were good company, full of stories about the wilderness and the strange characters who inhabited it. They treated Mara like an equal, teaching her techniques for notching logs and raising beams, never condescending or dismissive. You're stronger than you look, Samuel observed one afternoon as Mara helped lift a heavy crossbeam into place. Had to get strong, Mara said. Didn't have a choice. Best kind of strength, the kind that comes from necessity. 2 weeks into the work, more help arrived. This time it was Marshall Webb, accompanied by Clara, Pete, and 2 young men Mara didn't recognize. Brought reinforcements, Webb said, dismounting with a wince, and supplies. Mrs. Halstead sent food, nails, some tools she thought you might need. Clara rushed over and hugged Mara. I couldn't stay away, not when I knew you were up here doing all this work. You didn't have to come. Yes, I did. You stood up for me when nobody else would. Let me help you build something. Pete was already examining the foundation, nodding approvingly. Good work. Solid. This'll last. The 2 young men introduced themselves as Daniel and James, brothers who'd heard about the trial and wanted to help. We don't have much in the way of skills, Daniel admitted, but we can work hard and follow directions. With 8 people working, the cabin began to take real shape. The walls rose log by log, each one carefully notched and fitted. The roof frame went up, strong and true. They worked from dawn until dark, breaking only for meals and brief rests. In the evenings, they'd gather around the fire, exhausted but satisfied. Stories were shared about the trial, about life in Coldwater, about the wilderness and survival, and what it meant to build something worth keeping. What made you decide to do it? Daniel asked Mara one night. To stand up against Eugene? Weren't you scared? Terrified, Mara admitted. But I was more scared of spending the rest of my life running, of always looking over my shoulder, always being afraid. That's brave, James said quietly. It's not brave. It's just refusing to accept that things have to be the way they've always been. She poked at the fire with a stick. People told me my whole life that I didn't matter, that I should be grateful for whatever scraps I could get. And I believed them for a long time. But then Rowan showed me different. And once you see that things can be different, you can't unsee it. Clara nodded. That's what you showed me too, that we didn't have to accept being treated like dirt just because someone had power over us. The thing about power, Webb said, is that it only works if people believe in it. Eugene had power because everyone in Coldwater believed he was untouchable. The moment you challenged that belief, his power started crumbling. But he fought back, Pete pointed out. Tried to have her killed. That's not powerless. No, Webb agreed. But it was desperate. And desperation means you've already lost. You just don't know it yet. The conversation drifted to other topics, hunting stories, gossip from the towns below, speculation about the coming winter. But Mara kept thinking about what Webb had said about power and belief. How many other people were out there, trapped by someone else's power, believing they had no choice? How many were suffering in silence because they thought standing up was impossible? An idea began forming in her mind. Dangerous, ambitious, probably foolish, but it wouldn't let go. The cabin was finished in 5 weeks. It was larger than the old one, with a proper loft for sleeping, a bigger fireplace, shuttered windows that actually kept the wind out. They'd even built a separate room that could be used for storage or, potentially, another person. Standing back and looking at it, Mara felt something swell in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or satisfaction. or just the simple pleasure of seeing something she'd built with her own hands. "It's beautiful," Clara said, standing beside her. "It's a cabin," Mara said, but she was smiling. "It's more than that. It's a home, a real one." That night, they had a celebration. Garrett had shot a deer and they roasted it over a big fire in the clearing. Pete had somehow produced a bottle of whiskey, which was passed around and toasted with. "To new beginnings," Webb said, raising the bottle. "To standing up," Clara added. "To stubborn women who don't know when to quit," Rowan said, looking at Mara with something that might have been affection or pride or both. Mara took the bottle and raised it. "To everyone who helped, to second chances, and to building things that last." They drank and ate and sang badly and told stories until the fire burned low. One by one, people drifted off to sleep, some in the new cabin, some in bedrolls around the fire. Mara sat with Rowan on the porch of the new cabin, watching the embers glow. "You did good," he said. "We did good." "No, this was you. I just helped." Mara shook her head. "If you hadn't stopped those men in the alley that night, I'd probably be dead, or broken, or so far gone I'd never have found my way back. Everything that came after started with you seeing me when nobody else did. I saw potential. You did the work of making it real." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Mara said, "I've been thinking about something." "That's usually dangerous." She smiled despite herself. "This place, this cabin, it could be more than just a home for us." "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are other people out there like I was, desperate, scared, nowhere to go. What if we made this a place they could come, a refuge, a place to heal and figure out what comes next?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "That's a big undertaking." "I know. Would change everything, your life, my life. This wouldn't be peaceful mountain living anymore. It'd be constant work, constant people, constant problems." "I know that too." "And you still want to do it?" Mara thought about Elizabeth, holding her baby and crying as she told her story. About Clara, who'd been so damaged by Eugene's lies that she'd almost stopped believing in herself. About Pete, who'd been discarded as useless when his hands started shaking with age. About herself, scrubbing dishes in a freezing kitchen, convinced she deserved nothing better. "Yeah," she said. "I do." Rowan nodded slowly. "Then we'll do it. But we do it right. Build proper structures, establish rules, make sure it's sustainable. No point creating something that falls apart the moment things get hard." "Agreed." "When do we start?" Mara smiled. "I think we already have." Over the next few days, their guests departed one by one. The trappers headed north to check their lines. Webb rode back to Pinehaven. Daniel and James went home, promising to spread word about what was being built in the mountains. Clara and Pete stayed longer, helping set up the cabin properly, discussing plans for expansion. "You'll need more buildings," Pete said, sketching rough designs in the dirt with a stick. "A bunkhouse for single folks? Maybe family cabins eventually. Definitely a bigger storehouse and a proper workshop." "That's a lot of building," Mara said. "It is, but you won't be doing it alone. Word gets out about what you're doing, people will come to help. Some to stay, some just to contribute." He looked at her seriously. "You did something most people never do. You showed that standing up is possible. That matters more than you realize." Clara had been quiet, but now she spoke. "I want to be part of this." Mara looked at her. "What about the boarding house? Mrs. Halstead needs you." "She's already talking about hiring someone else. Says she knows I've got bigger things to do." Clara's expression was determined. "You gave me my voice back, Mara. Let me use it to help others find theirs." "It won't be easy. Living up here is hard, even without taking in people who are hurting." "I know, but I'm stronger now. We both are." Clara grabbed her hand. "Let me do this." Pete cleared his throat. "Don't want to be left out of the invitation." "Pete, you've earned your rest. Rest is for the dead. I've got knowledge in this old head, skills in these shaky hands. Let me teach people. Let me be useful." His eyes were bright. "Please." Mara felt her throat tighten. "You're both welcome, for as long as you want to stay." They worked through the fall, preparing for winter and for whatever came next. They built a second small cabin, barely more than a shed, but enough to house one or two people in a pinch. They stocked up on supplies, preserved food, cut firewood until they had enough to heat both buildings through the coldest months. And they waited. The first person arrived in early November, just as the first real snow was starting to fall. She was barely 18, with bruises on her face and terror in her eyes. She'd heard about Mara from someone in Pine Haven, heard there was a place in the mountains where women could be safe. Her name was Beth, and she'd been sold to a mining camp by her father to pay his gambling debts. Mara took her in without hesitation, got her warm and fed, let her cry without asking questions. When Beth was ready, she told her story. The abuse, the fear, the escape that had left her wandering in the snow, half frozen and completely lost. "You're safe now," Mara told her. "Nobody will hurt you here." "How can you promise that?" "Because I won't let them. None of us will." Beth stayed. She was skittish at first, jumping at loud noises, flinching when people moved too quickly. But slowly, day by day, she began to relax. Clara worked with her, sharing her own story, showing Beth that healing was possible. In December, 2 more people arrived. A man named Thomas, who'd been injured in a logging accident and couldn't work anymore, and a woman named Sarah with a young daughter, running from an abusive husband. The small settlement was crowded now, everyone crammed into the 2 cabins. But they made it work, sharing space and resources, helping each other survive. Thomas, despite his injured leg, had a sharp mind and could read and write, rare skills on the frontier. He started teaching Sarah's daughter letters and numbers. Pete taught him carpentry techniques he could do sitting down. Sarah was quiet but hardworking, taking over most of the cooking and helping Clara with the endless daily tasks that kept everyone fed and warm. Winter set in hard, trapping them in the mountains for weeks at a time. It was crowded, sometimes tense, occasionally frustrating, but it worked. When spring came, they expanded, using techniques Marcus would later teach them, but for now, just using common sense and determination, they started building more structures: a proper bunkhouse, a larger common building for meals and gathering, a workshop where Thomas could teach and work. Word spread. Marshal Webb sent people their way, those who needed refuge, who had nowhere else to go. The territorial government, impressed by what had happened at Eugene's trial, sent a small grant to help with supplies. By the second summer, there were 12 people living at what they'd started calling Haven. Not because anyone had officially named it, but because that's what people called it when they talked about it. That place up in the mountains, that haven. They established routines, rules, systems for making decisions and resolving conflicts. Not everyone who came stayed. Some healed enough to move on, to start over somewhere else. But others put down roots, made Haven their permanent home. Mara found herself becoming something she'd never expected: a leader. People looked to her for guidance, for decisions, for reassurance. It was uncomfortable at first, this responsibility. But she learned to carry it. Rowan remained her steady presence, never pushing himself forward, but always there when she needed advice or support. He taught hunting and tracking to anyone who wanted to learn, kept the settlement supplied with meat, maintained the boundary between Haven and the outside world. Clara became the heart of the place, the one people went to when they needed comfort or understanding. She had a gift for seeing pain in others, for knowing when to push and when to give space. Pete became their grandfather figure, teaching skills and sharing wisdom, his shaky hand still capable of delicate work when he took his time. In the 3rd year, something unexpected happened. A delegation from Coldwater arrived, led by Mrs. Halstead and several other business owners. "We need to talk," Mrs. Halstead said without preamble. They gathered in the common building. Mara studied the visitors warily, not sure what to expect. Mrs. Halstead got straight to the point. "Eugene's saloon has been sitting empty since the territory seized it. The building's deteriorating. The town council wants to do something with it, but there's disagreement about what." "What does this have to do with me?" Mara asked. "Some of us think it should become something useful. A community center, maybe. A place where people can get help, find resources, learn skills." Mrs. Halstead looked directly at Mara. "We want you to run it." Mara blinked. "What?" "You've proven you can create something meaningful. Haven is known throughout the territory now. People speak of it with respect." One of the other visitors, a merchant Mara vaguely recognized, spoke up. "Coldwater needs something like that. Needs someone who actually cares about helping people instead of exploiting them." "I can't leave Haven," Mara said. "You wouldn't have to. Not permanently. You could split your time or train someone else to manage the Coldwater location, however you want to structure it. Mrs. Halstead leaned forward. The point is, you've shown there's a better way. Help us bring that way to Coldwater. Mara looked at Rowan, at Clara, at the others. They were all watching her, waiting. Can I think about it? She asked. Of course. Take your time. After the delegation left, Mara walked into the forest, needing space to think. The offer was unexpected, overwhelming. Part of her wanted to say no immediately. Haven was more than enough responsibility. Why take on more? But another part, the part that remembered what it was like to be trapped in Coldwater, with no options, no hope, whispered that this was a chance to help more people, to create change in the very place that had tried to destroy her. Rowan found her an hour later, sitting on a fallen log overlooking a valley. What are you thinking? He asked. That this is crazy, that I'm barely managing Haven as it is, that I have no business trying to run something in Coldwater too. Okay, what else? That maybe it's an opportunity to actually change things, to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to others. Also true. So what do I do? Rowan sat beside her. You do what you've always done. You figure out what matters most and you follow that. What matters is helping people. Then there's your answer. Mara spent the next week discussing it with everyone at Haven. Sarah pointed out that having a presence in Coldwater could help them recruit volunteers and secure more supplies. Thomas suggested it could be a pipeline, people getting initial help in town, then coming to Haven for longer-term support if needed. Clara was enthusiastic. It's perfect. You transform the place that hurts you into a place that helps people. That's justice. In the end, Mara said yes, with conditions. She would advise and oversee, but Mrs. Halstead would handle daily operations in Coldwater. They would maintain Haven's principles. No one turned away, no judgment, just help and support. The Coldwater Community Center opened 6 months later. The old saloon was gutted and rebuilt, transformed from a place of exploitation into a place of hope. They offered job training, literacy classes, a shelter for those with nowhere else to go, resources for people trying to escape bad situations. It wasn't perfect. There was resistance from some in Coldwater who preferred the old ways. There were funding challenges and logistical problems and all the complications that came with trying to create change. But it worked. Slowly, incrementally, it worked. By the 5th year, Haven had grown to include 23 people living permanently, with a rotating population of others passing through. The settlement had expanded to include multiple buildings, gardens, livestock, even a small schoolhouse where Thomas taught children and adults alike. Marcus Chen arrived in the 4th year, bringing his engineering knowledge and his terminal diagnosis. He revolutionized their building techniques, created the water system that would serve them for decades, taught 3 young men the principles that would let them maintain and improve it after he was gone. His death hit hard, but his legacy remained visible in every structure he'd touched, every system he'd designed. The winters were still brutal, the work was still endless, and there were still conflicts and challenges and moments when it seemed like everything might fall apart. But it didn't fall apart. It grew stronger. Mara watched it all with a mixture of pride and disbelief. The invisible girl from the saloon kitchen was now someone people sought out for advice and guidance. The woman who'd once believed she didn't matter was helping dozens of others discover that they mattered too. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. One evening in the 6th year, as Mara sat on the porch of the main house watching the settlement wind down for the night, Sarah joined her. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Always. Do you ever regret it? Everything that happened, the trial, the attacks, all of it?" Mara thought about that, about the fear and pain and uncertainty, about the night she'd been sure they wouldn't survive, about the scars, physical and emotional, that would never fully heal. "No," she said finally, "because the alternative was staying invisible, staying trapped, staying convinced I deserved nothing better." She looked at Sarah. "Every hard thing that happened led to this, and this," she gestured at the settlement, "this is worth it. Even when it's hard? Especially when it's hard. Easy things don't change you. Hard things do." Sarah nodded slowly. "My daughter asked me yesterday why we live here instead of in a regular town. I told her we live here because this is where people matter, no matter who they are or where they came from. That's a good answer. She said she wants to stay here forever, that this is home. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. I never thought I'd be able to give her a real home, but you did. We did, all of us together. No, Mara, you started it. You made the choice to stand up instead of staying down. That's what made everything else possible. The years continued to turn. People came and went, each leaving their mark on Haven. Some stayed for weeks, some for months, some forever. Beth, the frightened teenager who'd arrived in that first winter, grew into a confident young woman who became one of Haven's best hunters and teachers. She eventually left to start her own homestead, taking everything she'd learned and applying it to her own dream. Thomas became the unofficial historian of Haven, documenting its growth, recording stories, making sure future generations would know how it started and why. The Coldwater Community Center expanded, adding services and programs, helping hundreds of people over the years. It became a model that other towns started copying, creating similar centers throughout the territory. Mara aged, her hair showing gray, her body carrying the marks of years of hard work. But she also grew in ways she'd never imagined, in confidence, in wisdom, in understanding of what it meant to build something that mattered. Rowan aged too, moving slower, his aim not quite as steady, but still the quiet strength at the center of everything. They never married. It seemed unnecessary somehow, but they built a life together that was deeper than any legal document could capture. In the 10th year, Marshall Webb retired and moved to Haven permanently. Figured I've earned some peace, he said when he arrived. And if I'm going to spend my final years somewhere, might as well be somewhere that actually stands for something. He became their connection to the legal system, helping navigate the bureaucracy that seemed to multiply as the territory grew and changed. On a spring morning in the 11th year, Mara woke to find Rowan hadn't gotten up with the dawn as he usually did. She touched his shoulder and he didn't respond. He died in his sleep, peacefully, exactly as he would have wanted. The grief was crushing. Mara had known this day would come eventually. Rowan had been 20 years older than her, and the wilderness took its toll. But knowing didn't make it easier. They buried him on this hill overlooking Haven, next to Marcus and Pete, who'd passed 2 years earlier. The entire settlement attended, along with people from Pine Haven and Coldwater and towns Mara had never even visited. At the funeral, people told stories about Rowan, about his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, his willingness to see people others overlooked. Clara spoke about how he'd stood in that alley and changed everything. One moment of choosing to help instead of walking away. That's all it took. And from that one moment, all of this grew. Mara couldn't speak at the funeral. Her throat was too tight, the pain too raw. But later, alone at his grave, she finally found words. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for teaching me that I mattered, for showing me how to build something worth keeping. She placed a hand on the wooden marker. I'll make sure it lasts, I promise. The work of Haven continued. It had to. People still needed help, still needed refuge, still needed someone to show them they mattered. Mara threw herself into it, using work to dull the grief. She expanded the programs, improved the structures, trained more people to take leadership roles. Because Rowan had been right about one thing, nothing lasted forever unless each generation chose to keep building. Sarah became her partner in running Haven, bringing organizational skills and a practical approach that complemented Mara's vision. Clara focused on the emotional and healing aspects, creating programs specifically for people escaping abuse or trauma. Webb handled the legal and governmental connections, making sure Haven remained protected and supported. Together, they created something sustainable, something that could outlast any one person. In the 15th year, the territorial governor came to visit. It was a whole production, security, officials, journalists documenting everything. The governor, a pragmatic woman named Catherine Ross, toured Haven with genuine interest, asking questions, listening to stories. At the end of her visit, she pulled Mara aside. I want to make this official, she said. Charter Haven as a recognized community with self-governance rights. Give you legal protection and access to territorial resources. Why? Mara asked. Because you're doing what the government keeps failing to do, actually helping people instead of just talking about it. Ross smiled. Also because it's good politics. People love a success story, and you've become one. The charter was signed in June. Haven became officially recognized, with Mara named as founder and administrator. It came with responsibilities, some bureaucracy, some regulations. but also with protections and resources they'd never had before. That evening, as Mara stood on the hill looking out over the settlement, she thought about how far she'd come from that freezing kitchen in Coldwater. 15 years. Hundreds of lives changed. A place that had started as one man helping one desperate woman had grown into something that mattered to an entire territory. It wasn't perfect. There were still struggles, still failures, still people they couldn't help. But it was real, and it was making a difference. Sarah joined her on the hill. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it. No, you started it. Every person who's been helped here, every life that's been changed, it started with you refusing to stay invisible." Mara shook her head. It started with Rowan choosing to help a stranger in an alley. And what made him help? What made him step in when everyone else walked by? I don't know. He saw something in you, something worth saving, and you proved him right. Sarah put a hand on her shoulder. You taught all of us that we're worth saving too. The years continued. Mara aged into her 40s, then her 50s. Her hair went fully gray, her hands became gnarled from decades of work. But she never stopped. Haven grew to nearly 60 permanent residents. The Coldwater Community Center helped thousands. Other communities started similar programs, inspired by what had been built in the mountains. Young people who'd grown up at Haven went out into the world and created their own refuges, their own centers, their own ways of helping people who'd been overlooked. The ripples spread wider than Mara had ever imagined possible. In her 60th year, sitting on the porch of the house she'd built with Rowan all those decades ago, Mara received a visitor. It was a young woman, maybe 25, with nervous eyes and fidgeting hands. She looked like Mara had once looked, invisible, beaten down, convinced of her own worthlessness. "Are you Mara Klein?" the woman asked. "I am. I heard there's a place here, for people who have nowhere else to go." Mara smiled, the same smile she'd given hundreds of others over the years. "There is. You're standing in it." The woman's face crumpled. "I don't have money. I can't pay." "We don't need money. We need people willing to work, willing to heal, willing to help others once they're strong enough." Mara stood and gestured toward the settlement. "Can you do that?" I think so. I want to try." "Then welcome home." As Mara led the young woman toward the main house, she thought about Eugene Voss, dead now for years, his legacy nothing but a cautionary tale about the abuse of power. And she thought about Rowan, whose single choice to help a stranger had created a legacy that would outlast them all. She thought about herself, the invisible girl who'd learned she mattered, who'd fought to prove that everyone mattered, who'd built a place where that truth was lived out every single day. The world hadn't changed completely. There was still cruelty, still injustice, still people who used power to hurt those beneath them. But there was also Haven, and places like it, and people who'd learned that standing up was possible, that fighting back could work, that nobody had to stay invisible if someone was willing to see them. That was Mara's legacy. Not perfection, not the end of all suffering, just proof that things could be different, one person at a time, one act of courage at a time. One choice to help instead of walk away. That night, the settlement gathered for dinner as they did every evening. 60 people crowded into the common house, passing bowls and plates, talking and laughing and complaining about whose turn it was to do dishes. It was chaotic and loud and imperfect, and Mara wouldn't have changed a single thing. Because this noisy, messy, beautiful community of people who'd been thrown away and found again, this was what victory looked like. Not a perfect ending, not a world transformed overnight, just a place where people mattered, where nobody was invisible, where second chances were the rule, not the exception. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. And as Mara looked around the table at faces young and old, broken and healing, lost and found, she finally understood what Rowan had tried to tell her all those years ago. You don't change the world all at once. You change it one person at a time, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. She'd made her choice that day in the town square when she could have run but chose to stand. And from that one choice, all of this had grown. Her greatest victory wasn't surviving. It was showing others that they could survive too. And more than survive, they could build, they could grow, they could matter. That was the truth she'd carry with her for whatever time she had left. Nobody's invisible. Not really. Not if someone's willing to see them and teach them to see themselves. That was Mara's gift to the world. Not perfection. Not the end of all pain. Just the stubborn, undeniable truth that everyone deserves a chance. Everyone deserves to be seen. Everyone deserves to matter. And sometimes the people the world throws away are exactly the ones who build something worth keeping. Years later, long after Mara was gone, Haven remained. It evolved, adapted, changed with the times, but at its core it stayed true to the principles that founded it. The wooden marker on the hill where Mara was buried, next to Rowan and the others who'd built Haven with her, bore simple words. Mara Klein. She saw worth in everyone. And below that, added by those who came after, especially in herself. It was the truest epitaph anyone could have asked for, because that's what the whole story had always been about. Learning to see your own worth, and then helping others see theirs. One invisible person at a time, until nobody was invisible anymore, until everyone knew they mattered. That was Mara's legacy, and it lived on long after her story ended. In every person who found refuge at Haven, in every life changed at the Coldwater Community Center, in every act of courage by someone who'd learned from her example. The girl who didn't matter had mattered more than she ever knew, and the world was better for it.